Capablanca always said the same thing. I prefer to really understand the position rather than memorize thousands and thousands of lines by heart. What I'm bringing you today is a truly deep example of what I'm about to explain. Capablanca doesn't make things complicated at all. And I'm going to show you how you can apply this in your own games. In this example, Capablanca faces off against Marshall. In this game, there's a lot to talk about since Capablanca won the world match against Marshall by 8-1, which is to say, a real thrashing. So Marshall spent 8 years preparing a good technique to try to win this particular game. He studied for 8 years, which you're about to see next, but Capablanca, without having any idea about it, simply by understanding the position, managed to win again. So let's go ahead and take a look at this masterpiece, which I'm absolutely convinced you'll want to watch more than once. So make sure to save this video, enjoy it above all, and try to understand as much as you can, because trust me, you're going to love it. E4 to E5, knight to F3, knight to C6 from Marshall, and bishop to B5. This is known as the Spanish opening, or Ruy Lopez. The game continued with A6, and the bishop retreats to 4, knight to F6. This is known as the Berlin variation of the Spanish opening, which is the most played nowadays. Kramnik made it popular in his match where he managed to beat Kasparov for the world title, which is why it's so trendy today. The game continues with castling bishop to e7. This pawn is given up. It's also very common to capture this pawn. It's not really a giveaway because it can be recovered later. Bishop to e7, rook to e1, b5 attacking this bishop, which has to retreat all the way to b3. I'll go through this part a little faster, okay? Because this isn't what's really important. These are just opening moves. If anyone needs to watch it again, that's no problem at all. Just rewind the video and watch it again. And castling on black side, very good. The game continues with c3, and now is where things really get interesting. The theoretical moves here are, for example, d6, which defends their pawn structure very well. For example, it's also very popular to play this bishop to b7 since the fianchetto has been open to attack this e4 square with both the knight and the bishop using x-ray pressure. And here, Marshall drops the bombshell he's been preparing for so long. d5. At first glance, this move might seem normal, but if we stop to think a bit more, we can see that it gives up a pawn. Why does it give up a pawn? Because when this pawn exchange on d5 happens, the rook's file opens up. And how many pieces are attacking this pawn? Well, look, the knight and the rook, 2 pieces. How many are defended they? Just the knight. So, logically, here, white can win a pawn. What is Marshall playing with this pawn sacrifice? Well, the pawn sacrifice is carried out as follows. Pawn takes pawn. Logically, knight takes pawn. So for now, the material is equal. And now, knight takes e5. And now, yes, it's white who manages to win an extra pawn. So what was Marshall planning here by giving up this pawn? Well, look, because it's really interesting. The game continues with knight takes knight, drawing the rook toward the center of the board to the e5 square. And now this knight returns to f6. With what idea? Well, now the idea behind the pawn sacrifice is that it has left the diagonals toward the king wide open. Both the bishops, the knight, and the queen can come in to attack the king, while Capablanca has everything grouped here on the queen side. Do you see it? So Marshall had really thought this through here. Capablanca quickly, seeing that this rook is very vulnerable to attacks, decides to pull it back to its original square, L1. And so, logically, Marshall keeps improving his pieces and attacking toward the king. Let's take a moment to evaluate this position. It's true that Capablanca is up a pawn, but be careful with this Marshall variation because his pieces are very active. If Marshall is able to coordinate his pieces for the attack, that's going to be very hard to defend. So, for example, what's being threatened here? The threat is very logical. Bringing in the knight while also threatening with the bishop and the knight, and bringing in the queen as well. Do you see it? And this attack on these 2 points is starting to look really deadly, right? So here, Capablanca says, well, if they're threatening to jump here, let's think of a prophylactic move. What does a prophylactic move mean? It means I anticipate my opponent's plan. This move is h3. Very simple. What h3 does is prevent this knight jump. But do you know what Marshall did at this exact moment? Knight to g4. A good move. Amazing, right? How is it possible that here Marshall gives up this knight? Well, this is where everything Marshall studied begins. He actually anticipated that Capablanca might play h3 to stop his attack, but he understood that sacrificing this knight was a very good idea. Can this knight be captured? Yes, it can, but it's dangerous because now the queen would come in through h4, threatening mate. It couldn't be stopped, because then bishop takes and queen takes check, and then this bishop would come in capturing here. So accepting this piece would definitely not be a good idea. Why? Because, as you know, a piece is worth the same as 3 pawns, and Marshall would end up capturing these 3 pawns, leaving the king completely exposed. Therefore, it's not a good idea to capture it. Instead, white made the best move in the position, which is queen to f3. It brings in a piece to the defense, and also, well, it attacks this rook. Not only does it attack the rook, but it also prevents, again, a prophylactic move, it prevents this bishop from coming to attack the king. Because if the bishop comes now, it would simply be captured. So queen to f3 is a very good move. I assure you, the game keeps getting better, and you'll be able to learn some amazing lessons. Let's see if we can break the record for likes on this video. And you make me the happiest man in the world because I really think this lesson and this game deserve it. So leave a big like and let's continue with the game. Look at what Marshall did here. He went in with the queen anyway. It makes a lot of sense. Now it's even more dangerous to capture this knight because the queen would come in directly along with the bishop, and that would be lethally dangerous. So here the player with the white pieces, Capablanca, says, well, I'm going to play logical. I place a pawn in the center. It's always important to control the center. But even more important, what I'm doing is freeing my pieces that are completely blocked. Here, Marshall surely thought for a while because he has a lot of moves available, right? And surely the move he played wasn't the best one. In fact, look, I'll explain the move he played. Knight takes on f2. Here, Capablanca, explaining after the game what he thought about this move, said the following. I think this is where Marshall made his real mistake. But honestly, it's probably what almost all of us would have done. Because, for example, what attacking moves do we have here? This bishop over here? Well, I just move away, and nothing at all happens here. It's true that the bishop could come back and threaten his fork, but then I'd bring in my bishop to stop everything. So it seems like nothing at all would happen here, right? And it seems to me there aren't any other moves. This bishop has to move, otherwise they're going to take my rook. Although for now, bringing the queen here wouldn't be a good idea, because this queen would stop defending the f2 square, and the black queen would come in here with drastic consequences. Queen takes, and then the rook will be captured with check lead. I'm trying to explain everything so it's super clear for you. Sometimes I go a little fast, I'm aware of that. But you can watch the video as many times as you need. Perfect. So here, knight takes on f2 looks like it wins a pawn completely for free. In fact, here it seems like Marshall gets back the pawn he was down earlier. Key question. Could you take this knight here? Well, it doesn't seem like a very good idea, and I'm going to explain why. I'm sure many of you are thinking you can't take because of this move, but now this would be a huge mistake. Can you tell why? I'll explain it to you. Because here, the player with the white pieces, Jose Raul Capablanca, would have checkmate in 2 moves. A brutal queen sacrifice on f7. The king can't escape because the rook would be taken with mate. And when the queen is captured, the rook comes in delivering checkmate, thanks to this bishop doing an exceptional job pinning the rook. Do you see it? This would be checkmate. Impressive, right? It's clear that now, after queen takes knight, this bishop move is not the right play and would be a complete mistake. But it's true that black would have this check, and now they could do this. Why? because now they really would be pinning the queen to the rook. This brutal sacrifice wouldn't be possible because rook takes queen would be check. So they'd be gaining the tempo and then could escape the checkmate, for example, by creating an escape square here. Pay attention. I'm going to set this back the way it was so you can understand it perfectly. After this capture, knight takes pawn. You can't capture the knight. Why? Because there would be a check, and then they'd come back here again. Obviously, after this check, you can't capture the bishop because the queen would be left completely undefended. So look at how these two geniuses calculated, right? What did Capablanca play here? And of course, he didn't capture the knight. Instead, he brought the rook over to attack this knight. So now it's being attacked by three pieces, and they're starting to threaten capturing. The game continued with yet another brilliant move by Martian. It's really obvious he spent a lot of time preparing for this game. The bishop sacrifices itself on g4. It has to be captured, no matter what, because both the queen and the rook are being threatened. In other words, there's no choice but to capture this bishop. If white now tried to capture this knight, it wouldn't be a very good idea, because bishop to g3 would follow, threatening a queen that doesn't have many squares, and when it moves away, the bishop would be exchanged for the rook, the other rook would come in, and I can already tell you this would end up being checkmate. You can check it yourselves with your inhuman companions, the machines and analysis engines. This is spectacular, where the only possible move here is to accept the sacrifice, which is what makes Marshall's play spectacular, right? And why does he give up this bishop now? Well, the key idea was to open up this file so he could bring his pieces in. First with the bishop, and now by pulling the bishop back, what he's doing is attacking with the queen and threatening checkmate on the next move. Queen to h1, checkmate. So there's no other option. Here, what Jose Raul Capablanca has to do is give up. Material, rook takes knight. All right, of course, here the rook is captured, but this is important. Before capturing it, it's necessary to make an intermediate move, and I'll explain which one it is. Queen to h1. Why? Because now, when the king moves, it's true that we're going to capture this rook, but in the meantime, we're also threatening this other bishop. So here we win the rook cleanly. Marshall with a clean look. So now here, white has to decide something. What do I prefer? To capture his bishop and let him capture mine, or to move my bishop away and let him take his? In other words, do I prefer to exchange bishops or not? Well, here, logically, since white has few pieces left, what he wants is not to exchange pieces. When you have less material, you shouldn't exchange pieces. So what does he do? Bishop to e2, he moves his bishop back and leaves it here to keep everything defended, so now, logically, Marshall also has to move his bishop away, otherwise he'll lose it for nothing. Capablanca tries to exchange queens, and logically Marshall doesn't want to exchange them, because otherwise he would lose his attack. Imagine if Marshall loses his queen now. He obviously wouldn't have any way to attack anymore. So first he gives this check, and when the king moves, then he moves his queen to give check again. And look at what Capablanca has achieved, because it's spectacular. Let's do an exercise. It's true that this king looks a bit odd here, but let's split the chessboard into two halves. This half and this other half. This half here has all the black pieces, all of them. Do you see it? All of them. While the other half doesn't have any. Therefore, this king is completely safe on this half of the board, since there are no pieces that can attack him. Do you understand? Also, he can only be attacked along a white diagonal, and the black player, Frank Marshall, doesn't have the white squared bishop, so this diagonal can't really be used effectively. The game continued like this. The bishop goes to f2, the white square bishop pins this bishop with the queen, which quickly moves away to get out of the pin, and bishop to e5, a very subtle move that prevents entry through this square here. And it controls a better diagonal. Surely, all of you would want to play the typical a4 to try to bring this rook into the attack, since these pieces aren't doing anything. But this move by the player with the white pieces is very refined. c5, a completely logical move. Marshall wants to open up this defense around the opposing king. That makes a lot of sense. especially when there are opposite side castlings, or in this case, when the king is on opposite sides of the board. What you want to do is attack toward the enemy king's flank to open up lines, and then, for example, use the rooks to put a lot of pressure on that king. Be careful, because it's true that black is threatening a lot and also has Capablanca tied down because, for example, this knight can't move or the rook would be lost. Pay attention to how Capablanca held on. That's true. Marshall had a devastating attack and studied it very well, but Capablanca understood the position perfectly. The game continued with pawn takes and bishop takes on c5. Pawn exchange, and now this b5 move gains a tempo against the bishop while he develops on the queen side to launch his attack with the rook. His pieces are very cramped here, and he's opening up a bit to be able to play with this rook. Here, Marshall played this very interesting move to try to open everything up in his favor. What Marshall wants is to open up these two pawns to expose the king. And here, Capablanca says, block some. I capture here. Do whatever you want. Marshall captured here to open this file toward the king, but Capablanca chose not to capture this pawn, avoiding the attack. Instead, he brought in the rook. Do you see it? He activated his idle piece, asking himself, how do I activate this piece? Well, this way, by exchanging pawns, I open up the file and also gain the initiative by attacking this bishop. You have to admit, it's spectacular. Pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn, a very good move. Capablanca is getting safer and safer from the threat because the black queen is simply all alone. The bishop comes to pin the knight on b4, and now Capablanca, look at this weapon he has, the passed b-pawn, which now moves to b6 and is getting closer and closer to queening. Watch out, the danger in Capablanca's counterattack is starting. Marshall, he hasn't been able to make the attack work because Capablanca has defended perfectly, and now watch out because there's a possible counterattack coming. Bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop. Now it's Capablanca with the bishop pair aiming at the opponent's king side. But be careful, it's true, this king is a bit defenseless. And now, watch out, because many of you might be thinking, well, Marshall can get active here. This is a complete mistake. And the game is lost immediately. You know how Isaquio, how Capablanca would punish this mistake? Once again, with the same thing. Queen takes on f7, check. And when the rook captures, it's the same checkmate as before. You see it? Incredible, right? So what's being threatened here? This rook can't join the attack because this pawn would be lost, and therefore the game. So here, Marshall, as good as he was too, logically, they're both world-class elite players. He played a 6 precisely to avoid these checkmate threats and create an escape route for his king. Very good move. And so here, Capablanca says, I'm going to push this pawn. And the threat keeps getting stronger. What's Capablanca's idea? The idea is, since the queen, the bishop, and the pawn are all aiming at the a8 square, I want to bring in the rook and then try to promote no matter what. So this b7 pawn is starting to become really, really powerful. Now, with this escape route available, Marshall starts to put pressure with the rook, but he didn't know about the spectacular counterblow Capablanca had here, which was bishop takes f7, check. I'll explain it to you because it's wonderful. If the king moves away, rook takes h6 is checkmate, taking advantage of the pin from the other bishop. Do you see how important it is to have a pair of bishops? If the king moves away, it's mate. If the king tries to escape via h7, it'll still end up being mate. First check, then mate. Do you see it? Spectacular, right? So here, after this bishop takes on f7 check, there's no choice but to capture the bishop. There's no other way, because otherwise it would be mate. And then what Capablanca does here is threaten this queen promotion, and I'll explain how it would work. Right now, I don't have another queen, but anyway, let's suppose this upside down rook is a queen, okay? Check, the king would have to move, and then simply this rook sacrifice, then this check here, and it would just end with mate right here. So, do you know when the player with the black pieces, Frank Marshall, resigned? It was simply when this bishop move to f7 was played. spectacular game here. This pawn is actually the other color. This game is amazing. I'm sure you'll want to watch it several times because honestly, it's an impressive lesson. Now, friends, if you enjoyed this video, we'll see each other tomorrow in the next one. Goodbye.